We want agreement by which we can live or die. You choose.
You know what they say, right? Be wary of paramilitaries. When the men with guns who have always claimed to be against the system start wearing uniforms and marching around with torches and pictures of a leader, the end is nigh. When the pro-leader paramilitary and the official police and military intermingle, the end has come. So at 17, in this great nation, the USA, you're allowed to buy and own a combat rifle and ammunition, but not a beer. This is great. This is precisely what making America great again is. Not being able to purchase alcohol at 18, but being able to do the draft, to be eligible for it. It always struck me as a nonsensical reality. Donald Trump dismissed the idea that systemic racism is an issue in America as he visited Kenosha, Wisconsin. In the wake of protests that erupted after last week's shooting of Jacob Blake, a black man, of course, by a white officer, of course. Speaking after months of largely peaceful anti-racism protests that have been marred by occasional violence, what did Mr. Trump go and say? What did he go and say? Well, he said that, there are a few bad apples in law enforcement. The US doesn't have a broader problem with race. So adroit, so succinct, so prosaic. I don't believe that at all, said Mr. Trump, as he criticised the protesters for demonstrating against law enforcement officers. When he was speaking to a group of Kenosha residents who had probably been racked by grief at what they'd seen, or not, they included lawmakers, police officers and business owners. He said the city had been ravaged by anti-police and anti-American riots and described recent protests as domestic terror. Mr. Trump used the trick to accuse Democrats of being soft on crime and to stress the law and order message. Law and order, the one that's emerged as one of the main themes of his re-election campaign against Joe Biden. Anything that forgets the COVID debacle. When he was asked whether the scale of anti-racism protests since the death of George Floyd earlier this summer meant that the US needed structural reform to tackle discrimination, Mr. Trump returned to his message of security, ignoring any of the pleas of the families, of the fathers, of the mothers of the slain, saying the people of Kenosha wanted to live in a safe city. But Donald, it's not working. Voters see that you're desperate to change the subject from your COVID hokum to law and order. The problem is, they recognise that you are the problem, that you're just making a bad situation worse, and by design as well. The election is still a referendum on you, and you're losing it. Keep it up. It's done in reality as if Trump had to run for high office in any other Western democracy, he would have been laughed at the stage. Every day he says and does things that demonstrate his manifest incompetence. The man is an idiot. Yet here we are 4 years later, with people on this message board defending him, and Biden's lead in the polls narrowing. Ultimately, in a democracy, the people get the leadership they deserve. And what we are seeing is just how uninformed the American electorate actually is. Meanwhile, the rest of the world watches on in horror. Well, Italy had Berlusconi for many years. The UK had Gordon Brown for many years. Now we've got Boris. Step one of any plan is to incite hatred and violence to divert attention from poor performance. Step two, run as the law and order candidate. The very same play we have seen many times before in history. You expect insightful commentary about US society from a bumbling, rich old white guy who lives in a bubble. If Trump declares that 2 + 2 = 7, that bold-faced lies equal absolute truth, that 100% ignorance equals supreme knowledge, that hatred and bigotry equals sacred Christian values, that killing Americans equals patriotic virtue, that paying bribes equals integrity, that undermining the Constitution equals American exceptionalism. And the press diligently reports and discusses ad infinitum every inanity and lie uttered by Trump as if they don't come out of the mouth of a prevaricating, deranged, immoral, death-promoting sociopath. Trump played media's sensationalism and the innate need to appear neutral very well. And the mainstream media should honestly get 50% of the credit for actually electing this guy. Trump has zero filters. He's obviously electioneering. That said, this is only going to get him more votes. not just from the whites, but across the board, because no one wants that street violence. The law and order candidate always prevails. The self-defense nonsense was made up by Trump, who is now apparently a defense lawyer. Stop defending a deluded fool who listened to Trump's BS and will now spend the majority of his life in prison for willful murder in the commission of a crime. The first murder was crime. The willful murder was his second victim. Then there are the accessories to murder that armed an underage kid with an assault rifle. Admittedly, however, Trump scooped Biden once again by physically going to Kenosha and actually addressing those shop owners, which were, had their stores burned down, which is a lamentable and terrible act. You should watch the video before making any judgments yourself. Sure, you can throw out all the facile stuff about Trump being awful, Trump about, being a douche, and he is in most things, but that's easy. But how does Biden actually go about it for the win? If Biden wants to win, he has to go to these towns, especially in swing states. Why? He has to show he cares by physically being there, not by being in his basement. For those of you who think Trump is not responsible, like incitement to violence and bloody insurrection leading up to the election is not a crime. Like speaking out against a Boogaloo boys, an ABBA racist, trying to start a race war so they can cleanse the US of all foreigners, not white people, is presidential leadership. Even after these right-wing terrorists, which they are, nationalistic terrorists murder a policeman in California, start fires in Minneapolis, blaming BLM protesters, and now kill 2 and maim a 3rd unarmed man in Kenosha. Gaslighting is not going to work anymore. I would crawl over broken glass to vote against Trump and the Republican cowards defending him if I was unlucky enough to be an American citizen.
You told us that there is justice, equality for all in this country. Well, then stick to your word and let us see the justice and equality for all. Or else admit to us that you're not a man, you're a word, you're afraid of us, you're afraid to give us equal stand. You're afraid that if you give us equal ground that we will match you and we will override you. And if that's what you're afraid of us, then tell us that just what you're afraid of. But don't keep hiding it from us and holding this up to us, and every time we ask you for something, you give us a little bit of something, and it's all tokenism. We don't want tokenism. And there are most black men in this world that don't want charity. And yet still every time we ask you for something, you give us a little piece, a little piece. You're playing games with us.